Okay, so let's try it again. So this is tough times. We're getting ready to head into the first wave of really bad news when it comes to loss of life and people getting stressed out. So the first thing I want to do is take a look at the headlines that are on. Let's just pick a news aggregation site, the Drudge Report, and just talk about some of the structural and revolutionary changes that are going on in the world right now. And then I'd like you to think about it from a certain perspective. I want you to imagine in your mind who your client is. Could be a large cap, mid cap, or small cap. Could be a public or private company. Could be in the service sector or manufacturing or government or nonprofit or educational. Some organization is trying to make sense of all this volatility in the world. And they need some insights from you about what's going on in the world and how to separate out what's important and how to think about the things that matter for their business. So let's take a look at some of the headlines and see what the implications are, and then I'd like you to think about how that might affect your potential client, and then come up with some a response to them. So what I'd like you to think about is, imagine before we do this that they come to you and they say, hey, we're in this situation, what should we do? So they're asking you directly for advice because you're a doc. How are you going to answer them routinely? When somebody comes to you looking for specific advice for them to act on, they are essentially giving you the locus of control. They're looking to put responsibility on you for the decisions that they're going to have to live with. Now that's, when you read Shine, and he talks about process consulting, one of the things that people will hire an expert for is that to give expert testimony, expert decision making. I mean, I can understand that. Why wouldn't you? There's a problem with that in the way that those decisions get made, and accountability and responsibility and follow through and commitment and all that. And so there's a less than stellar track record when it comes to expert consultants. Think of that as the first wave or first generation. The second generation, or the second role that Shine talks about, is the doctor-patient, where the patient is a co-participant in their health. They clearly have skin in the game. They're looking for the doc to help them with diagnosis and a treatment plan, but they retain the decision-making authority, and they're going to take they're looking for expert advice, but the locus of control is still in their part. But the doctor has a very particular role to play as an outsider with knowledge that offers maybe some courses of action. So the third style of process consulting is one in which the consultant is a facilitator, a catalyst to generate safe spaces for their client to develop new capacities to act, to give them a safe space in which they can adopt new perspectives with suggestions and resources and insights and feedback and accountability. But it keeps responsibility firmly in the camp of the client who has the problem and who's going to solve it eventually. And the intention is that you are creating capabilities that they didn't have before. And so you're concerned about teaching them process and not so much the content. And it's very seductive to adopt one of the first two points of view, particularly if you have expertise in that area and you can see what you would do, and you might even know what it is that they should do. But without them retaining the ownership, you're kind of undermining the ability for them to grow as organizations or as people. So I want you to put yourself in that position and think about the roles that you've played in your life when asked for advice and how you responded to it. When we get into the practical exercise on this one, I'll come back and revisit that. But I want you to think about some of these ideas that I'm brainstorming here with respect to the headlines, and think about how you would respond when they come in with all these different concerns. So the first one might be, I want to look at, we're not going to talk about all of these, but this notion that thousands of Zoom meeting recordings are exposed online. So the real concern with Zoom is that on the one hand, it's an American company and it offers this amazing capability to do online webinars, conferences. In fact, at the recent conference I was at for ABSEL, Association of Business Sims and Experiential Learning, 3 weeks ago, we shut that down and went exclusively virtual to reduce the social distancing, or to increase social distancing, reduce global travel. And so we ran a academic conference on a short notice for 250 people using Zoom exclusively. I just received the video link of my presentation for my paper there, and I'll share that with you later. But Zoom was really, really powerful. But the problem is that the technology, the scientists, and the hosts are in China. And every Chinese company is connected to the Chinese government in some way. And so the probability that the software has backdoors and that security is not 100% guaranteed is almost a mathematical certainty. Like in Department of Defense, we're not allowed to use Zoom because of exactly those issues. Well, here's a headline that sort of testifies to that, which says, hey, the meeting recordings are exposed online, so there's already handling issues and security issues. When your company is looking to engage in distance learning and video conferencing, how important is that as an issue? What kind of risk does that represent to them? What kind of solutions does that constrain them in adopting? How do you put a cost on that? How do you insure against it? Next one. Pat Buchanan talks about that long term, the very nature of America may be changing irrevocably right now. That the voluntary and understandable relinquishment of individual liberty and travel rights and all that stuff for the sake of the public health has sort of triggered a better safe than sorry response at every level of government in many places that are putting limits on individual freedom and liberty. Now, I find it kind of ridiculous for people to say in the middle of a pandemic, that virus may be a bad thing, but the real risk is the possible erosion of our civil liberties. I mean, just shut up. Just shut up if you say that. If you can't see the difference between a temporary suspension of travel for the public health, which is already triggering an economic shutdown of 30% unemployment, thousands of people dying, and you can't see that in a time of war like that normal standards and practices of social freedom are not the best idea, then just shut up. Now, it's a second question about whether or not there is a generational issue involved here where people who don't have a vested interest in unrestricted corporate capitalism may be saying, what has it ever done for me? And why is there a $5 trillion bailout for the large cap companies and the banks, but not mom and pop, and not protecting people against rent? And the people only get a $1,200 one-time payment. Why is that social justice? And why is that a good thing for if capitalism is so great, why does it need a $5 trillion socialism bailout? Answer me that. So you're going to see a lot of narrative going back and forth about how, rugged individuals and freedom and liberty and capitalism and free markets need to triumph over the socialistic tendencies to do income redistribution and like the Andrew Yang guaranteed income. Well, that's kind of a specious argument too, because we don't really have capitalism. We don't really have free markets. If any, we have corporate oligarchies. Any reasonable, fair, objective analysis of the economy would show that's absolutely the case. So the America that Buchanan says may never be the same is not sort of missed the boat on that one. Next, nation facing hunger crisis as demands for food bank source. Think how much things would change, as bad as they are right now, if the food supply and distribution networks now come under pressure. Holy mackerel. So the people who are on the fringes, at the bottom of society and on the edges, who are not well supported, who don't have a voice, are more at risk than ever before. Walmart experiencing stockpile surges in people buying their stockpiles and boosting sales at Amazon. And at the same time, mom and pop firms are being squeezed out because they can't weather the storm, and they were not taken care of in the $6.5 trillion bailout bill, unlike the large corporations. And so that money went predominantly to large corporations with the ability to leverage it in order to buy their competitors, who and their small cap and mom and pop firms are not allowed to lay people off if they want loan forgiveness. So they're going to be forced to carry employees, and when their money runs out, they're up a creek. And the cash flush large corporations will be buying them out. So this is we're going to see a rush in about 6 months to even more centralization of power in the mega large corporations and the ultra rich, and the people who are going to suffer will be mom and pop firms. Well, the shambling economy right now undercuts the entire justification for Trump's limitation. He said, well, no matter how bad I am, at least the economy's doing well. Well, when that goes away, now suddenly, what's the appeal for Trump again? And how does that change their strategic messaging? How would you give some advice on that if you were the opponents? How would you approach that without doing harm in time of a pandemic? How do you make a legitimate, honorable case for a change of leadership in the middle of a crisis? What's the moral thing to do there? How are we going to vote in November? What if this thing gets a second and third wave of distribution like the Spanish flu in 1918 did? How is the national elections going to happen? I mean, there's already been historical levels of problems with the technology now. How do you convert to that at the last minute and have something that everybody can acknowledge and agree to? Democrats starting to make the case about health care as a right, driven by the pandemic. They're doing a poor job of it. I mean, riddle me this. If there's a lot of money to pay for free medicine for coronavirus and the consequences, that means if you got coronavirus and then developed pneumonia, your treatment and medicine is free. But if you got pneumonia the regular way through something other than coronavirus, are you on the hook to pay for all that? Where's the social justice in that? How is that going to play out in the strategic communications of the various parties? And that's all part of the strategy making at the national level. That's going to be a big part of the election. Payrolls are dropping, record unemployment, 30% of mortgages will default. Now, in 2008 and 2009, in that crisis, it was junk bonds and junk mortgages that were collapsing, not the basic single conservative home mortgage. But when 30% of those start to crash that were all AAA rated before, what happens then? Well, that's going to be a big part of it. There was nothing in the bailout, $6.5 trillion, nothing in the bailout for mortgage forgiveness or a mortgage moratorium, but the money for big banks and corporations was found. So why is it the little guys on the end who are most vulnerable, who are the consumers who drive the consumption economy, why aren't they taken care of? Where's the justice in that? Why do the large-scale capitalists need socialism to bail them out, but then they turn around and talk smack about socialism for the poor and the working class? Who speaks for them? Where's the organization that speaks for the workers with one voice? It used to be the Democratic Party. They have been co-opted by the corporate hierarchy, and so now there's very little difference, some would say, between the Democrats and Republicans. Started in the triangulation strategies in the 90s with the Clintons. So the populist appeal of folks like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders is gaining a lot of traction. Probably too late for this election cycle. But where does it go from there? What happens to the Democratic Party? Are they going to shift left and speak for the workers once more? Or are they going to squelch that like they did last year? And then what do the populists do? Do they stay in the Democratic Party? Well, why should they? Why would they? Are we about ready to see a third party break up? Other nations. Americans trying to flee to remote lands and survival retreats and wait it out. Social unrest in Italy and shops forced to hand over food without pay. Australia kicks out all foreign tourists. Law and disorder, unlawful disorder in Mexico. So breakdown of the social order. Fatalistic response in China, people lining up for hours to buy graves. Some gallows humor, people naming their kids after the virus. More breakdown of the social order. This feels like the Middle Ages. Ultra-Orthodox who were ignoring public health warnings on the basis of religious beliefs are now getting smoked by the virus. Everybody would come in, look at Sweden and how they're treating everybody like adults, and they're not taking away civil liberties. They're trusting the people to do the right thing. Well, that's a big fail. Their rate of infection and death is beginning to dwarf that of their European peers. And we live in a daily world of keeping score on the presidential tracking polls where the gamesmanship and tactical short-term meaningless victories and spin seems to be more important than policy and thoughtful deliberation. Well, if that's sort of the environment that businesses and organizations that you might be consulting with are dealing with, how do you help them develop an understanding of all those different threads? Which ones matter? Which ones are linked together and affect them because of the business that they're in? Which ones don't matter to them? How do you sort through all of that noise to find the things that really matter the most? Is there a way to apply the Pareto principle to this, where 20% of the information has 80% of the value? How do we sort that out? Well, let me share this next one with you. So I had a case where a kid, actually, one of my clients came in and asked me some very specific advice. We called this one the coachable moment. So you may find yourself in a position to be doing coaching of executives. And I'm coaching this guy, and I'll just share his story and sort of how I approached it. I'm not going to go deep into all the details, but I'm teaching this guy. He's a businessman. He's 45 years old, 3 kids, 3 businesses, son of an Italian immigrant, rugged individualist. He's an accountant, an insurance salesman, and a real estate agent. But he's trying to diversify by learning how to take to invest the cash from his business operations into equities, commodities, currencies. And so he's come to me to learn how to do that and how to run that in a business-like fashion. So I've been working with him for about 6 months. And he came to me with his, I felt he was ready for his monthly check-in, which is the first step in becoming a self-directed, self-sufficient professional. So I'm trying to wean him off my advice. So he comes in and he described the situation he was in and then asked me what he should do. He said, "Hey, Ken, 2 things. I've come across some other trading opportunities from other some educational opportunities for other people that would cost $4,000. Do I think it's worth it from a learning standpoint and self-development? And then for the monthly check-in that I challenged to do, he says, hey, I'm not ready for it yet because I've got to learn how to do things better, like managing my risk, maintaining my emotional stability, learn some technical pieces, and then manage my risk. Things that he did well, he came to work every day. He was up 24 hours. That's a unit of reward. That's a very good return on investment. That means for whenever he invests $1, he earns $1, and he netted 24 times more than he lost. So that's a pretty good work. That's more than $250,000 a year at the level he's trading. He learned how to scale into positions. He learned how to protect his open profits. And he was concentrating on just a few ideas for just a few symbols. Things that needed to do better was to work on his emotional resilience, because he was having, each day, this was the number of thousands of dollars that he was earning. So on the 4th of March, he lost 2,000. On the 5th of March, he earned 1,000. On the 10th of March, he earned 11,000. On the 11th of March, 11th of March, he lost 8,000. On the 19th of March, he earned 26,000. Then he lost 9, blah, 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 all the way through. The last 3 days, though, in a row were troublesome. And he went from plus 36,000 on the 25th down to 24. So that felt unsettling to him because he hadn't had a losing streak like that before. So the coachable moment was, what did I think that he should do in the situation that he was in? Should I recommend to him that he takes that other additional new training to learn other ideas and other techniques or whatever? And I said, well, this is the case study. So I have about 100 other clients. So I sent them a note and I said, now I want you other 99 clients to think about the situation that Joe is in. I want you to imagine that he came and asked you that same set of questions. How would you feel if you were in his position as the trader who was up 36,000 but then lost 12,000 in the last 3 days and is now only up 24,000? How would you feel about that? How do you feel about your own trading in the month of March? So I'm asking them 24,000. I mean, is that a nice problem to have, to be up 36 and then but to be able to leave the table with 24? Were they doing better or were they doing worse? And would they be interested in the systems that this kid was using to be able to earn that much money in what was the most brutal month in the market since the Great Depression? What kind of empathy do they feel for this person? And then how would you reply if he asked you for some advice? And then I want them to imagine what they think I might say to him in my formal role as a coach. And we're talking about thinking, feeling, reflecting, and doing. Well, after my advice to them and to Joe was, after you thought enough about it, scroll down for what I actually said to him. So what I said to him was this. I said, Joe, I had an answer written down for how I was going to answer you right away, but instead, I'm going to challenge you to develop 2 courses of action on how to proceed, to answer your own question. And this is a lesson in self-coaching. So I'm going to place my response in a sealed envelope in my email draft folder, and then I'll send it to you, Joe, when you ask me to, but only after you've gone through these 6 steps. So I'm going to give, or these 10 steps. So I've given him 10 things to do that look very much like the things that we've been talking about exactly in this course. So this is me applying the principles of this course in my actual coaching profession with a paying client who's following my guidance and working with me. So this is how you apply our teaching in the world after you graduate, as an example. So I told him I wanted to do an environmental scan, to do a SWOT and modified SWOT analysis, to the Miles model about prospectors, defenders, reactors, and integrators, to think about his purpose, place, progress, and posture. That's a model that I made up. To think about who is his chief decision maker, and then how to act as a chief of staff to make a recommendation for action. So I wanted him to go through this 10-step procedure. I'm teaching him a process of what to do when you feel agitated or emotional or aren't certain about what you should do. I'm teaching him a process of how to do that in a systematic way. The better he gets at this, the less he will need me to lead him through it. So this is in like the crawl, walk, run process. We're in the crawling phase, where I'm teaching him how to do the kinds of things that I'm coaching him to do. When he can do this himself without being told, then he can be a self-coach, and I will have transferred the skill to him. So I told him, go through those things and then come back to me. So he did. After he sent me his feedback steps and his information about what he actually decided to do after he went through those 10 steps, they were an amazing piece of work. I'm going to use that as an example to my other clients to say, this is what right looks like. This is a guy who in 48 hours worked his way through all that and came up with a really good plan that fits him. So what I told him were these words. These were the specific things that immediately came to mind. If I was a trader looking at myself and I had the same questions, this is how I would think my way through it. But I didn't want to put those ideas into his head until he had regained responsibility for his own actions and for his own self-coaching. I wanted him to go through that so that the next time that happens to him, and maybe I'm not there or whatever, he now has a chance of being able to do that in a helpful, useful way. Now that he's done that work, I can now give him this information, and now he can evaluate my advice through the lens of his informed judgment. And now he can evaluate what he wants to do. He won't take my advice uncritically. So we call this little exercise the teachable moment. It's one of 20 different psychological exercises that I teach in my coaching enterprise as a coach of executives, I would say. So I wanted to give you an example of real-world executive coaching using the materials that we have and then putting it into the setting of the modern world with today's headlines. So that's what I want to talk about today, is sort of the application at the decision-making level. Now you can imagine not just an individual businessman coming to you as a client, but a corporate board of a large corporation come to you, hey, what should we do about the world and the pandemic and what's going on, and and they're looking to you for advice, and you got to decide which role to adopt: expert, the doctor-patient, or a process consultant. What is it that you propose to do for them, with them, and how are you going to help them? And what role do you see yourself in, and how are you going to develop that in the program? So some questions for you to consider and think about. Please be safe out there. Stay off the beach. Wash your hands. Take care of the important people in your life. Do the right thing. We'll get through this. You're doing great in the course. Keep up the good work. Keep me informed. Let's continue to make the most of this opportunity to think deeply about who we are and what we want to do in the world and the difference we can make. And do not engage in useless activities, said Miyamoto Musashi, Japan's greatest swordsman in 1510. Let's take that under advisement and get out there and make a difference. So take good care, and we'll see you in the discussion boards.